Okay, welcome everybody to the Shropshire Partners in Care Mental Capacity webinar. And this one today is with Lorraine Currie, Mental Capacity Consultant. And Lorraine is going to talk to us about choice and all that jazz. So choice in the context of the Mental Capacity Act. Over to you, Lorraine.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, welcome. A little bit late starting, but I will try my best to keep to time. This is a new session and it's been generated by your questions, which is absolutely brilliant. So I hope that I'm addressing the things that you were asking, really. So let's have a look. So we're going to look at choice. We are going to look at choice in the context of the Mental Capacity Act. We're going to look at when is it a choice, and we're going to look at whose choice is it. So as we go along, I hope that makes sense, that I'm looking at two sides of this issue. So first of all, what is choice? So straight away I go to Google and I ask Google, what is choice? And it says these things here. So it's an act of choosing between two or more possibilities. So in other words, you've got to have something to choose. You know, if there's only one thing, then there is no choice. It also says that choice is a bit like option or alternative, preference, and it's the act or opportunity of choosing or the thing chosen. So it's doing something, it's an act when you choose. And it also suggests the opportunity or privilege of choosing freely. So there's no coercion. If it's a choice, it's something that is freely made. So this is our starting point, really. There's got to be something to choose from. Choosing is the actual act of making that choice, and it's something that happens freely. Okay. So I'm just going to show you some very unclear, but I'm afraid I couldn't get them any better because I've probably stolen them from Google. A photograph. And I just want to generate, I'm not going to actually ask you what you would do, but I'm going to ask you to think in your mind what you would do. So here's a guy looking at his phone. He's about to walk into a lamppost. As it happens, it's a padded lamppost. I couldn't find another one. So, you know, imagine you walking past him. What would you do? So if you just think in your mind, this guy's about to walk into a lamppost, you're walking past him, what would you do? Okay, hold that thought. Here's another scenario. We've got a woman walking along in the street. She's dropped a purse. You're walking along the opposite direction. See the purse on the floor. What are you going to do? I hope that this is going to make sense in a minute, rather than you thinking, what on earth is she talking about? Third scenario, guy crossing the road. Car speeding up, he's about to get hit by the car. You're there, you're the witness, you're close by to him. What are you going to do? Okay, similar thing, similar theme in each. So what I'm going to suggest is that you wouldn't say, oh, it's his choice to walk into the lamppost. I'm not going to shout out, oh, hey, watch out, you know, take care, because he's making a choice. It's his choice. You wouldn't say about the woman, oh, it's her choice. She must have made a choice to drop the purse. And you wouldn't say about the guy, oh, it's his choice to get hit by the car. Okay, so there are some things that happen and you intervene, either because you have a duty of care, or just because you're a human being or a friend. You know, you see the guy about to walk into the lamppost, you just alert him because it's the thing we do. But sometimes I do hear people saying, and I'm sure you do too, and that's perhaps what generated your questions, it's their choice. And I think, really? Is it really their choice? Was it really a choice? So sometimes I think we get choice and rights kind of mixed up a little bit.
In fact, it should be an expensive.
Somebody not muted. I don't know if Karen's able to. There we go. Well done. Thank you, Karen. So we're going to move on. We're going to look at who has choice. What is it? What is choice? So choice inevitably is decision making. It's looking at the options. You're going to have the apple, or you're going to have the donut. You know, one of those might be a healthier choice. One of them might be a not so healthy choice, but there's your choice. Two things. Having a choice is a sign of individual autonomy or freedom. We've got the ability to choose freely. And exercising choice involves making a decision. So when you choose between the apple and the donut, you are making a decision which one to have. So that's why choice is inextricably linked to the Mental Capacity Act, because it's about a decision. Apple, donut, it's a decision. Okay? So how then do we choose? We exercise choice by making a decision. I don't know if you remember this advert. I don't know why it stuck with me, but it used to be on, I think it was McCain's chips. Daddy or chips, daddy or chips. You know, it was a little girl and she had to choose between daddy or chips. But that choice is a decision. And we can only make a decision when we have mental capacity to do so. So in other words, we understand the relevant information. We can retain it long enough. We can take it in, use it and weigh it, and then we can communicate our choice. And that is the functional test of mental capacity. So that's decision making. That's how we make a decision. And any choice is a decision. So do I have the apple? Do I have the donut? What would we need to understand to make that decision? Hold on to it long enough, use it and weigh it. Oh, you know, I'm going to weigh in at Slimming World tonight. I'll have the apple, not the donut. You know, maybe some of those kinds of things. That's how we exercise our functional ability to make a decision under the Mental Capacity Act. As Karen said, we are going to leave questions. I've got 2 slides that say questions, but I'm going to skip over them. And we'll do questions at the end, and then you're not being recorded when you ask the questions. I guess that's the idea. But if you want to type them into chat as they occur to you, then I'm fine with that, and we can have a look at them at the end. Okay, so then when can't we make our own choice? So a person who lacks capacity for a specific decision then cannot make that decision. Someone else may be able to, and we'll have a little look at who. But if no one is appointed to make a decision for them, then it's a best interest decision. Even when it is a best interest decision, their wishes are still paramount. So we're still interested in the person. We still want to know about them. What would their decision have been? What do we know about it? But it isn't their decision to make. So that choice isn't there if capacity isn't there. So a really clear, message. Mental capacity, you decide. Mental capacity, you choose. Two ways of saying it, really the same thing. So mental capacity is key to having that ability to make a choice about something. Where the person doesn't have capacity and someone else is able to make a decision for them, then who is that? So there are only very specific people who can ever stand in that place of being the chooser or the decision maker. And that is a court-appointed deputy for the specific decision, so either health and welfare or finance, someone with power of attorney for health and welfare or finance, and in very specific cases, an appointee for benefit purposes only. These are the only people who can ever make a choice for someone else. Nobody else. Nobody else. Okay, so in summary, with capacity, it's my choice. But even where it is the person's choice, you can still advise, don't walk into that lamppost, you've dropped your purse. We still have a general duty of care. We can still say, what about this? Or have you thought about that? We still have a role, even where we know they have capacity and it's their choice. Without capacity, someone appointed can choose, but only those people appointed. And if there isn't anyone appointed, it's a best interest decision. Okay, hopefully you're all with me so far. So I'm going to look now at two aspects of choice. One is it's their choice, as in, can they actually make a choice, focusing on the choosing. And the second is it's their choice. So I'm focusing on the, is it them or is it someone else? Okay, I hope that makes sense. So if we say it's their choice, so in that example of, you know, somebody's dropped the purse on the floor, we wouldn't say it's their choice. But I do hear in a care context, something that you think, oh, that seems really odd. And the other person saying, but it's their choice. And then I think in my mind, well, is it? Because the only way it's their choice is if they have mental capacity to choose. So you can rely on that first principle of the MCA, the assumption of capacity, but not in the face of evidence otherwise. And you have to remember in all of this that the beauty of it all is that your protection from the things you may do that might make you liable to prosecution, your protection comes from the MCA. So you have to have that reasonable belief that the person lacks capacity or that they had it for the choices they were making in order to benefit from the protection of the MCA. Nice little quote about presumption. It's in a totally other context and it's a little bit legally, but it says the presumption of capacity is important because it ensures proper respect for personal autonomy. But like anything else, it has logical limits. Where there is good reason to have cause for concern, legitimate doubt about capacity, you can't use the presumption to avoid taking responsibility and assessing and determining capacity. So you can't just say, oh, well, the first principle of the MCA is the assumption of capacity, therefore they've got it, therefore it's their choice. You have to be able to defend that decision making, especially where the choice that a person's making may have consequences. So let me give you a little, some little examples. So we've got John, and a new support worker takes John shopping. John buys 6 cream cakes and he eats 3 on the way home. John has a learning disability. John is extremely overweight. John has the beginnings of diabetes. But on return to the setting, the support worker says, well, it was his choice. And in doing so, they're trying to be very sort of rights-based. He's got rights, it's his choice. Okay, not an uncommon scenario. So how would we know then? How would we know it's his choice? And we would only know it's his choice if we were certain that he had mental capacity to make that choice. So to get to that point, we would have to look at, does John understand the relevant information? So that might be the link between sugar and diabetes. It might be the impact of diabetes on his health and his lifestyle. It might be the importance of a balanced diet and obesity. We'd have to know that he could retain that information and that he can use and weigh it. So in other words, when push comes to shove, when he's in the situation of choosing, can he actually say, oh, hang on, I'm not supposed to eat sugary things because, so I won't choose the cream cakes. So if he can use that information, if he's understood it, retained it, and he can use it, but he's just saying, I don't care, to hell with it. You know, we all do that sometimes to some degree. Then he has capacity and it is his choice. But if he's unable to understand the information, retain it and use it, then he lacks capacity for that decision around diet. So it isn't his choice. So it's not enough to just kind of return and in your defense say it was his choice. Because to have made that choice, we have to be very sure that it was a capacitor's choice. Now, what I'm anticipating is that you're going to say, well, where does that leave us? What do we do then? Supposing he didn't have capacity, but he's heading in the cake shop and he's going to buy 6 cakes, what am I supposed to do? So my first suggestion is don't go near the cake shop. You know, there are ways, aren't there? With all of the scenarios we're going to face, there are ways and means. So we know this person doesn't have capacity to make the right sort of choices around diet. We know that they're inclined to the cake shop. So when we're going out, we go somewhere else. We don't go near the cake shop. We don't get ourselves in the situation that we're trying to avoid. Find a happy compromise. Is there something else that John really enjoys? Let's go and get that magazine on trains that you really love. Let's have a walk out to the shop. Let's go and get that. What else, does he enjoy? Looking at that kind of, what do we know about John? Hang on, if I take him out, I know he's going to make a beeline for the cake shop. Let's go this way. So some of this is just sort of human stuff. It's not any great complicated strategy. It's just human stuff, So if he's got capacity and we know that and we've tested it and we're sure he can understand, retain, use and weigh the information and he wants to buy the cake, there's very little we can do, but we can still advise. Look, John, my advice to you is, why don't you just get one? We'll take it back with us. Maybe have it later when we know how your diet's going that day. You can still advise. You can't force or coerce. And then if he hasn't got capacity, it's a best interest decision, which is going to be don't eat the cake. And how can we make that happen? Another example. Jane plays a game on her iPad. Every now and then there's the option to buy extra components. It's a farming game and she can buy straw, hay, tractors and so on. The game sets figures such as $2.99, $29.99 and $299. They're deliberately very misleading. So you do a routine check of Jane's bank statement and she spent over £1,000 in 1 month. The support worker says that she enjoys the game. It's her only interest, so it's her choice. Same type of thing as John. Same answer, but does she have mental capacity and how do you know? So we've got to know something about financial capacity. Does she understand the necessary information, which would be how much money she's got, how much she can spend, etc. All of those kind of necessary things to have capacity. If she does, and then she sat down and said, this is how I want to spend that money, then it's a capacitor's choice. But it could be that she doesn't understand that information and is just clicking and actually maybe not even realizing how much she's spending. So again, what can we do? You're going to ask me. Well, with capacity, we don't just write them off. Oh, you've dropped your purse, never mind. We can still offer guidance. So we can maybe look at ways of supporting it. So perhaps write down what $2.99 looks like very clearly and say, this is what you want to spend, maybe agreeing a spending limit. Without capacity, we're still looking at some of the same practical solutions, but we can go further in the person's best interest to the point where maybe we can look at restricting in-game purchases, that kind of thing. It gives us slightly more ability to intervene than we would if the person has capacity and it is purely and completely their choice. Everybody with me, I hope? So what I'm looking at is that kind of argument that somehow to promote a person's rights, we say it's their choice. And genuinely, when I encounter that, people do think they are making a sort of rights-based decision. But actually, to say it's their choice when some of what they're doing may be unwise, unsafe, unhealthy, we have to know, we have to be confident that they do have capacity to make that choice. Okay. So when we're looking at decision making, I'm not going to go through this in great technical detail, to be aware really that there are different models of decision making. So we use different models ourselves. You've probably made a decision about attending this session, and you might have done some of these steps. You know, you might have thought it over. You might have not given it any thought, and it was just somebody told you had to do it. You had no choice. You know, it was there was no autonomy or freedom there. But generally, decision making involves looking at what the issue is, looking at the alternatives, gathering all the information in that you can, making some sort of choice or selection, and then acting on it. There are sort of, these are just two kind of models that the internet will give you when you are ask it about how people make decisions. But it's important that we remember that those people we support will also have different ways of making decisions. Some of us might be much more intuitive. We might just go, oh, it feels right, I'm going to do it. Some of us might be more logical. No, I'm going to make a list. I'm going to weigh up the pros and cons. I'm going to do this in a very structured way. And we need to remember that people are people wherever we find them. And that's the same for those people we support. Sometimes we expect people to make decisions very quickly. We give them the information. We might do a mental capacity assessment, and it's quite rushed. And there isn't time for people's decision making. So thinking about how you make decisions, sometimes you might want to talk it over with someone else. You might want to ask a bit more about it. You might say, well, I just haven't got enough information to make a decision. You might say, I'm going to sleep on it. I need to just have time. I might need to test it out. Various different things that we do when we're making decisions that sometimes we forget to offer the same to the people we support. So we expect them to just give us an answer. You know, we ourselves might have, this is my husband, the first one. He generally has a very emotional first response, and then he thinks about it. He realizes that I'm right, and he comes to a more measured view. So he'll generally say, no. Then he'll think about it and I go, okay, you're right. Sometimes we might do things like, I just can't decide, I'm going to toss a coin, you know. And sometimes we might not be able to decide without actually trying something out. I don't know if I like it. But there's lots and lots of different ways that we make decisions. And yet sometimes when we are supporting another person, we forget that they might need to do that as well. They might need a little bit of time. So just as an aside, I suppose, really, that when you are looking at choice and decision making, remember that there's lots of different ways that people make decisions and have done throughout their life up to now, you know, and the bigger the decision, really, the more time we need to spend on being certain as to whether they've got capacity to make that decision or not. So I'm not going to ask questions there because we're going to ask them at the end. But what I have tried just to focus on in this first little bit is to be able to say it's their choice. We have to know that they have capacity. If they have capacity, it is their choice, but we don't just leave them to it. We don't just go, off you go, you're on your own, walk into the lamppost, you know, get hit by the car. We still offer advice, support, anything that we can do to support them. And we also remember that people make decisions in different ways. Okay. I think I've got, yeah. So the second sort of side of this whole choice thing is, when is it their choice and when might it be someone else's? Okay, so there are quite a few myths around this. And I'm going to deal with what I think are 3 myths. So the other issue when we start to think about choice is whose choice. And the greatest myth here is the myth of the next of kin. The greatest danger here, I think, is the protection imperative. And the greatest challenge is letting go. What do I mean by that? Well, you're about to find out. Okay. So, Mum, I'm giving you, oh, I'm sure this slide's in the wrong place, but never mind. Just let me have a quick look. Yes, it is in the wrong place. Oh, never mind, we'll do it now. This is a slide that raises those kinds of questions. And I'm sure these are things that you've encountered, something like this. These are definitely things that have been asked of me in the past. So somebody might say, oh, Mum rang up today. Mum rang up and she doesn't want Sally to go out today. Okay, whose decision is it? Is it Mum's decision? Mrs. Brown's daughter says her mother shouldn't have the flu jab. Okay, is it Mrs. Brown's daughter's decision? Jason's mum doesn't like him going to the disco. Okay. Fred's son doesn't believe in COVID vaccination and doesn't want his dad to have it. Julie always has to have a hat on, even when it's warm outside, because her mum has written to us about it. She always has to wear a hat. Okay, I'm sure you've encountered in your vast experience, and you've got much more than me, these kinds of things. You can probably just kind of tweak them, make them into, you know, oh, sorry, excuse me. You can probably, you know, substitute different names, different scenarios, but you will have encountered things where somebody, quite forcefully sometimes, who is a family member, is telling you something about how it should be. When we get onto the questions at the end, I'm sure you've got scenarios that you can comment on. So this is me questioning who it is who can make decisions. And I'm suggesting that the greatest myth that is around here is the myth of the next of kin. I don't know if we've previously, although yes, I think we have. I think we've previously done a link to one of the webinars that the National Mental Capacity Forum did on looking at this, looking at who is this kind of person who can make decisions. So next of kin doesn't have any legal meaning. It's an outdated term. I would not use it. I would urge you, if at all possible, if you've got it anywhere in your paperwork, to get rid of it. It's got no meaning. Even if you are named in some way as next of kin, you have no power. It's generally used to mean, who is it you want us to call for you? Who do you want us to ring? I think I'm right in saying this, and don't hold me to it, but I think the next of kin is somebody who has a legal responsibility over a body when a person has died. But other than that, it's got no meaning whatsoever. It's got no meaning in terms of decision making. Somebody says to you, I'm the next of kin. It doesn't mean anything. They have no rights. They have no powers. They have no ability to do anything whatsoever. It just doesn't have any meaning. And I recommend this booklet to you, and it's a booklet that you can use, I guess, as well. You could give it to people if you wanted to help them to understand what it means or what it doesn't mean. You can use this booklet there. It's quite good at looking at how you do get to have any sort of decision-making authority. Okay, so next of kin, get rid of it. You could say who's your closest relative, who's closest to you. Who do you want us, to speak to about things? Okay. But as I put the slide on earlier, the only people who do have that legal authority are those with an LPA or a deputy appointed by the court to make decisions. So for all of you, as well as the people you support, urge people to make an LPA. Urge them to make sure that those close relatives that they do want to be the decision maker can be the decision maker because they've made provision for it. Okay, LPA while you still have capacity, deputy is appointed by the court once you've lost capacity. Next of kin, nothing. Okay. The second thing that I think is an issue with other people making decisions is this sort of protection imperative. So that might be when we know that we are the decision maker, that professionals get worried about decisions that people might make. They worry about the risk of those decisions. Professionals obviously are understandably motivated by the desire to keep people safe, and the courts have acknowledged that, but sometimes put risk above happiness. And there are numerous court decisions that look at that balance, and you can probably all bring to mind Mumby saying, what use is it making somebody safe if they're just going to be miserable? So that's the second thing we're going to look at. And part of that is asking whether we have a different approach to choice when a person has a cognitive impairment. Do we adopt one of these sorts of stances, really, the kind of wagging finger? I'm not suggesting that you literally do it, but kind of metaphorically, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. Or the wrapping them in cotton wool or bubble wrap, we've got to keep this person safe. They can't possibly exercise choice or make that decision. Or the, no, you must stop right now, that sort of authoritative type of approach. So we do encounter all these in different ways when a person has a cognitive impairment. We have to be braver at balancing. There are some risks, but then the person's happiness is very, very important. And how can we tolerate this kind of acceptable risk for the benefit of their happiness? And it's a challenge to us, really. It's a challenge to how do we approach decision making when we're making a best interest decision for somebody? How do we make sure we're not just acting in this sort of protective way, and that we are looking at the person and the full extent of that person's wishes, feelings, emotions, values, beliefs, etc. The court has addressed this numerous times, and this is just one of them. This was an older lady in a care home who wanted to go home. It was a Dole's case way back, and the court, she said, if I go home and I fall on the floor and die, so be it. And the judge ruled in the end that she had capacity to make that decision. She understood the risks, but she was willing to accept those risks in order to be where she wanted to be, in order to be happy, be living in her own home, etc. And this is from that, one of these is from that case. So the first case quoted there is that professionals and the court must not be unduly influenced by the protection imperative. So that is that perceived need to protect the vulnerable adult. If all our decision making is just about protection. And then the second quote there is a risk that all professionals involved with treating and helping that person, including a judge, may feel drawn towards an outcome that is more protective of the adult, and therefore failed to carry out an assessment of capacity that is detached and objective. So we've got to be making that decision when it's a best interest decision as an objective decision, not just how can we get rid of all risk? How can we make sure they're completely safe? So let me give you an example about some of the kinds of things that we might encounter. So we've got Joan. Joan is the social worker allocated to assess Mrs. Barlow. Mrs. Barlow is currently living in a care home. Mrs. Barlow recently caused a small fire in her flat. Mrs. Barlow had lots of out-of-date food in her fridge and was quite unwell. Joan thinks it's much safer for Mrs. Barlow to stay in the care home permanently. So again, understandable, we get this decision-making that's based on immediate sort of response to risk and safety. But the questions to ask are about choice. Who's the decision maker here? Does Mrs. Barlow have capacity to decide where to live? She may have just been a little bit confused or ill. We need to look at whether she can understand, retain, use and weigh and communicate the necessary information. How did that fire happen? What are the risks? What can we do to manage those risks? Is Joan actually the decision maker, the chooser? Has Joan had a look whether anybody else might be able to make that choice? Is there an LPA? Has Mrs. Barlow made an LPA? Is there a court-appointed deputy? If not, then maybe it is Joan. Is she just being risk-averse? Could Mrs. Barlow's wishes be accommodated or tried? Is there a way of facilitating a living at home, maybe not using the gas cooker, for example? Okay, so it's about whose choice is it? Who is that decision maker in this and in every scenario? The third, I've got a quote there. I think these slides have just maybe slightly moved around a little bit, but I'll come back to it. The third issue that we're looking at here is, the first one was the myth of the next of kin. The second one was looking at that protection imperative. And the third one that we encounter, I think, from both sides really, is of letting go. And I'm not suggesting it's our letting go, I'm suggesting it's maybe other family, friends letting go. Particularly parents of younger people with disabilities, learning disabilities, get so used to having to fight for their child. They've probably had to fight every single step of the way for everything. And every need, every assessment, everything, that they then find it very hard to stop. And we slide through this place where a young person moves through being 16 and 17 to 18. The Mental Capacity Act begins at age 16, and there's a sort of sliding scale a little bit in the middle there. But 16 isn't a cut-off point where we say to parents, it's nothing to do with you anymore. We just kind of cast them aside. But we as care professionals have to be aware that legal rights and roles might be different, or most definitely are different, when a young person is 16. So unless parents are aware of this, then it can cause conflict. But of course, that awareness is not somebody saying, well, you're out of the picture now. Your young person's 16, the Mental Capacity Act kicks in, they make their own decisions. So there's a sensitivity to it, isn't there? And to me, this is part of training, teaching, implementing the Mental Capacity Act from a much younger age, so that people know as their young person approaches 16, the law is going to look at them differently and say they can make their own decision. But just as any of us who've had 16-year-olds know, they don't wake up on the 16th birthday and you go, right, off you go, do it all on your own now. I mean, in my experience, I've got 4 children. Well, they're not children now, but they were. None of them have just suddenly made their own decisions. They've all said things like, oh, Mum, will you ring the doctor and make an appointment for me? Or will you ring the dentist? In fact, they still do. I've just had a text this morning. Can you log into my student loan account and find out what I owe? It never ends, does it? You don't just find them fully functioning on the 16th birthday. So even though the law says 16-year-olds on the whole are making their own decisions, we still expect support. The same principles that we talked about earlier, we don't just go off into the world. And as care professionals, we don't just go, nothing to do with you now, parents. So the parents may no longer be the decision maker, but they still have a very important role in being consulted in any best interest decision where that young person lacks capacity. Where the young person has capacity, then it's their decision. And that communication around the role of mental capacity is very, very important. So an example here. Ashford is planning where to live when he leaves residential college. Now, I haven't said how old Ashford is, foolishly, but I should have done. But I've envisaged Ashford here to be 17-ish, approaching a time when he's going to make a decision. At college, he's formed a relationship with another male student and they want to live together. His parents are not happy and say the college should have stopped this relationship and they want their son to come home. It's based on a real example, as all of them are that I've highlighted today. So whose decision is it? The parents will be used to taking a lead role in this kind of decision making. They may be very assertive about what they want, but somehow we have to navigate that path that says it's Ashford's decision if he has capacity. Are his parents legally appointed decision makers, which until he's 18, that isn't going to be possible. He could make an LPA at 18 if that's what he wanted to do. The court could appoint his parents as court-appointed deputies at 18 if they felt there were going to be a number of linked decisions of importance that would need a specific decision maker. The courts are not keen on this. It's something being looked into and being kind of pursued, but they're not hugely keen on appointing decision makers. Even if they are legally appointed, and we'd have to pretend he was 18, they've still got to act in his best interest, not their value base, not their life choices, his best interests. If they're not appointed in any way, then it's a best interest decision. And they could be the decision maker. It would more likely in this case be the professional facilitating the move, but the parents have to be consulted and involved, and his wishes and feelings are key. Okay. Now, sometimes, where's my slide? Got a slide that I'm sure I've put in, but it's not there, but I'll keep going until it appears. Sometimes there is an LPA or a deputy and we feel they are not making the choices that are in the person's best interests. Okay, so sometimes let's say with Ashford you might say, but you know, this is a genuine relationship, he really wants to live with this other young man. Parents won't consider it because it's against their views. What do we do? What do we do about it? So I've just put a couple of slides in about how you report a concern about an attorney or a deputy. So where they are, there's an LPA or a deputy, you can find, if you go on, this won't have a hyperlink because it's just a copy of the slide. But if you find the page on the Office of the Public Guardian, it tells you how to raise a concern. And that concern isn't necessarily a situation of abuse. It may be they're not acting in the person's best interest, which I know you might ultimately say could be abuse, but it might just be that their decision making isn't looking at the person's wishes, feelings, beliefs and values. So this is still the route to raise those kind of concerns. Okay, and there is the how you write to them. They have their own concern raising form. So if you are on the website and you do click, I know I do a lot of gesticulating, which doesn't really work in a Zoom call. You can use this concern raising form, and that will allow you to just generate your concern, which could be, you know, Ashford's parents have got our court-appointed deputies. They're not acting in his best interest. They're not looking at his wishes and feelings. And these will be investigated. I'm sure Karen covers this anyway on safeguarding training. So where's my slide? Right, there we are. It's not in the right place. I'll move this round after. So we've been talking about, well, we haven't, I have. I'm going to stop shortly. We are going to have questions, but we've talked about what is choice. Choice is a decision. To be able to exercise choice means making a decision, means you have mental capacity. Sometimes we say it's their choice and we don't know whether it is or not because we haven't assessed capacity. Sometimes then we conclude that the person doesn't have capacity for the decision, therefore it isn't their choice. Whose choice is it? Sometimes we are influenced by people who are very assertive, but it's not actually their choice to make because they're not legally appointed to act. Okay. And this question of who is the chooser, who is the decision maker, has never really been made clear in the Mental Capacity Act Code of Practice. And over the years since 2007, which is how many years now? 15, 16, I don't know, I can't add up. We've had a lot, there's been a lot of issue around family members being excluded or family members being afforded more power and authority perhaps than they had, professionals steaming in full steam ahead as the decision maker, and the code was not clear. As you know, the Mental Capacity Act Code in full has been revised, rewritten, joined together with an LPS code, and it's back with Parliament. No, it's not. Oh, if only it were. It's back with DHSC, who are now looking at our responses to their draft document. The MCA part of it is actually greatly improved, and we hope we can find a way of separating these two, but I don't know if that will be possible. So this is wording from the new draft MCA code, okay? So we don't have this yet, but this is what was proposed. And it does, I think, make it clearer who is the decision maker. So it says, in the code and in everyday use, the term decision maker is frequently used. However, in general, it's important to understand that the Act, the Mental Capacity Act, doesn't identify any formal decision makers. So there's nothing in the Act other than LPA, lasting power of attorney, EPA, the old forerunner of that for finances, deputy, or of course the Court of Protection itself. Other than that, it doesn't give you any very clear guidance. In this situation, this person is the formal decision maker. It doesn't do that. In every other case, the Act does not say that a specific person or type of person is the decision maker. And this is to be heeded by social workers, doctors, everyone. The mental capacity, it doesn't automatically give me as a social worker any power. It doesn't automatically say that this medical consultant is the decision maker. So it means that the fact that someone is seen as the person's next of kin does not mean that they have any legal right to make any decision on their behalf, which I think we've covered. But also, a professional does not have a right to make that decision on behalf of the person, simply because they occupy a particular position. Decision making should be informal, collaborative, with all those involved in the person's welfare. So it's a sort of warning, really, both sides. You know, just because you're the professional social worker doesn't automatically mean you are the decision maker. But certainly those people who are family members, close family members, may consider themselves to be next of kin. You don't have that legal authority. The only way you can be certain of that is by your loved one making an LPA that appoints you to make those decisions. A warning to every one of us on the call as well. Have you done that? Have you made an LPA so that you're never in this situation in the future? Who do you want making those decisions for you? Who do you want to make financial decisions, care decisions for you, even when you're not able to make them in the future? Something we should all be doing, all of us. Okay, so have we got the rights wrong? Promoting choice and control is really, really important. And I'm not by any means saying that. I hope that I'm saying the opposite of that. This begins way back when we provide options for care and support, and when we support the person's decision making. That's our strength-based practice. That's when we practice supported decision making, right back at the beginning. It doesn't stand alone from the MCA. We are always looking at how we can promote somebody's decision making. But we sometimes think that promoting choice is somehow a standalone right. That if, as I've already mentioned, if we say, oh, it's their choice, that somehow that makes us kind of rights-based. But the real danger is in that if we don't know that it is their choice, because we haven't got the reasonable belief that they have mental capacity for that choice. So this area, this whole area that you raised brilliantly with your questions, I think is the place where human rights and mental capacity meet. And this is the place where, when we're certain that we've properly applied the Mental Capacity Act, then we are promoting rights. And where it is their choice, we support them and help them with that choice. Where it is someone else's choice, we make sure that that someone else is the right someone else. And even then, we make sure that we represent the person's wishes, feelings, beliefs and values, and we make sure that the decision is the one that is right for them, not for someone else. Just a quick mention of consent, because this often gets kind of mingled in with choice. And again, it's just really a warning about the way that we sometimes convey things. So I often read, and I'm sure you do, has such a body got capacity to consent to? So have they got capacity to consent to having a flu jab? And the way that that's written provides for only one outcome, because it talks about consent. So there's no choice there, because we're only providing consent. What if they've got capacity and they don't want it? Then that is dissent, isn't it? So to be a choice, we have to present both outcomes. So we really shouldn't be saying, has X got capacity to consent, we should be saying, has this person got capacity to make a decision on whether to have a flu jab or not? Yeah. Whether to decide about the flu jab, which offers the option for a yes or a no. If we only present the choice as being consent, then there's no consideration of dissent. So it's just really about how we convey things to people, but perhaps more importantly, how we record the things that we are conveying and testing. So where does that leave us? To make a choice, a person must have mental capacity. Never say it's their choice unless you genuinely know it's their choice. And to know that, you must have assessed capacity. You must have a reasonable belief that they have or don't have capacity for the decision. Never say it's their choice unless they have capacity or they are the person that is legally appointed to act. And fear of risk, desire to protect, and never reasons to prevent a person exercising their choice. Okay, this is where your rights based, but that's really risky, that's really scary. Do they have capacity? Yeah, then okay, it's their choice. You might still want to get involved in risk mitigation, etc. So I've tried my best to find a, what is it called? Is it an acronym? I don't know. To spell with the letters of choice. And my challenge before we have some questions and so on is, can you do better? Can you think of a better one beginning with CHOICE? So this is my starter for 6. Choice is a decision. Have you assessed capacity? Opting out isn't an option. You can't just say it's their choice, opt out of assessing. Incapacity means they can't choose. Can someone else? Capacity means it's their decision, but you can still advise. And everyone's views are important. Pretty good go, but I'm sure you could do better. Okay, so it's about 22. I'm gonna ask Karen to stop recording. I'm going to say thank you with biscuits that have got pink icing on, and then we're going to take some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
And just before you do that, Lorraine, just on behalf of Shropshire Partners in Care, I'd just like to say thank you very much, and I'm stopping the recording now.
Okay, thanks, Karen.